Greetings, dear ones. It is Monday, the 21st of December. It is the winter solstice, and it feels very special to be sharing our time together today on the solstice, because you all have been light bearers in my life. And I think this is a time not only when the light begins to return to the natural world, but I believe that it's a time that we are coming to new light within ourselves. And I believe that as a community, we will be able to help one another on our journey toward the light. And this is an especially wonderful day for the solstice, because it is our Monday reading and reflecting with Maitri video, which is the one that we share publicly for free. So welcome all patrons, and thank you for your support. It means the world to me. I couldn't do this without you. And welcome to all of you who are not patrons, but are maybe coming to these videos just on Mondays when you can. And I love you all. If you are here, I embrace you. I send you love. I hold you in my heart. And I wish for much light and love to be laced throughout the days ahead. For those of you who are not patrons and don't hear these videos, which I do 5 mornings a week for patrons on Patreon, I just wanted to let you know that we are currently reading May Sarton's Plant Dreaming Deep. I read each day and then have a few moments of reflection after the reading. And you know, it's okay if you haven't heard this whole book. Each chapter is a wonderful thing to experience. And right now, I think just being able to relax and be read to is a soothing balm when we really need it. So in that spirit, I will start our reading time. And if you are interested in more of these videos coming to you 5 mornings a week, plus a lot of other content, plus seeing Maisie's world, the art being created and working toward a book, which is what my patrons on Patreon are supporting me to do. And I send a lot of content and the creation of a community for women, artful women, women who are creative, women who want to be part of a women's circle. That's what we're all about here. So, without further ado, this chapter is called Mud Season. A little extra light there. In most places, spring begins in March. But in this ornery part of the country, April finds us still bogged down in limbo. When crocuses are out in Cambridge, we may still have a blizzard. Extreme weather brings a certain exhilaration with it. What is harder to bear is the long wait in the soggy, gray world. The rocks stand up, raw and desolate, in the colorless meadow. The trees look thin and exhausted, and the longer days only accentuate the sour wilderness feel of it all. A meager wilderness, all stains and patches and broken stone walls. I'm sorry, Molly's trying to get something. There you go. Here. Molly, my little dog, is trying to get something, and she's digging under the pillow that the laptop is set on, which is what my tripod. Okay, I'm so sorry for the interruption. A meager wilderness, all stains and patches and broken stone walls. I have learned that April is a good time to go out lecturing, to go towards spring long before it reaches Nelson, when hepaticas are lifting their delicate blue and white heads in Indiana, and the Judas tree and white dogwood are in flower in Kentucky. Almost anywhere is better than here in mud season. But that first year, full of expectation, exhilarated by having survived the winter, I did not know the ordeals to come. In February, I had pored enchanted over the seed catalogs and their glossy photographs, dreaming the still non-existent garden. My idea was to combine vegetables and picking flowers in a plot just behind the house. Sitting at the kitchen table in a snowstorm, I had joyously imagined Chinese peas, eaten pod and all, zucchini, cucumber, every kind of lettuce. I went wild on flowers, cosmos, zinnia, marigolds, elegant salpiglossies, annual phlox, delphinium, bachelor's buttons, with a total disregard of how all of this was to be fitted into one small patch. After all, one has to be allowed some extravagance in February. By April, all the little packages of hope were stowed away in a big tin bread box in case a mouse decided on nasturtium, delicious, as an aperitif before going on to candle ends, soap, and any crumbs I might have left lying about. By April, I wandered about outside, peering under the spruce and hemlock boughs. I had strewn over the flower beds to see whether anything was coming up. Would the peonies, the phlox, have survived the winter? So far, there was no sign. Then, one evening, I heard a slight, shrill, continuous singing, a little like distant sleigh bells, and I suddenly remembered what Tink had said when we sat on a pile of lumber eating lunch that summer day. The peepers. Wait till you hear them when it seems as if spring would never come. The long wait was coming to an end. The brooks, unfrozen at last, rich in melted snow, ran impetuously over and around boulders, making pools of brown foam wherever they were impeded, and tiny waterfalls and whirlpools. And I understood better than before Gerard Manley Hopkins' fascination with the patterns of moving water, as, remembering the exquisite drawings in his notebooks, I myself bent to closely observe the rich flow of spirals and swirls, curling themselves around a rock. What a thrill when the first skunk cabbage came out, thrusting its baroque green through moldy old leaves. I was starved for color, as well from motion in the static world, and that first bright green of the skunk cabbage was a tonic. But the greatest change was going on in the air overhead. Skies were a gentler blue, soft white clouds piled up into quick rainfall, and the sunsets lost their winter brilliance as bright gold changed to pale gold, crimson to pink against a hyacinthine sky. Best of all, one could smell earth again after the long frozen months when only wood smoke sweetened the icy air. A pair of phoebes appeared, flicking their tails on the telephone wires. They were building a nest under the porch eaves, as they have every year since. A bunch of snowdrops pushed up through the sodden grass by the front step. It was the beginning, all right, but there was still a long way to go. This brief explosion was followed by weeks when nothing happened. It rained. I learned what mud season means when the car got stuck again and again, making deep ruts in the driveway. The grass was still gray. Since I could not reach the dump on wheels, I had to haul the ash cans inch by inch up a steep incline slithery with mud. It snowed again. It froze again. At least once each spring, I see the daffodils and crocuses completely covered by snow after they have flowered. I was to learn that the snow is kind. Poor man's fertilizer, they call it, but that frost is the killer. And we have had frost in Nelson at one time or another in every month except July. So through all of April and through most of May, we are still suspended. The birds come before the leaves and flowers, warblers on their way north, the first fat robins to stay, running and stopping to pull a worm with their knowing beaks. Swallows come back to fly restlessly in and out of the broken window pane I have left as a swallow door in the barn. And one morning that first spring, I looked out of the window and caught sight of a bluebird sitting on a granite post just a few feet away. I do not really mind the long wait, but I do mind the fact that when spring finally comes, it comes with such a rush that one cannot keep track of all that is happening. This swift change from not enough to too much is disturbing. Where to look? What to do? Where to begin? Who can keep up with a spring that comes and goes, it would seem, in the space of a clap of thunder, that takes you by the throat, as it were? The maples, which had looked so old and forlorn all winter, were suddenly covered with small green umbrella flowers. Shall I ever manage to be present in the hour they open? Always they have just arrived when my back is turned. At last, when I tossed the hemlock branches onto a big pile for burning, I saw that everything I had planted was alive. The phlox was already there in green, fleshed-out humps. Tulips and daffodils had pierced through, and the small red spears of the peonies were above ground. I went out on a warm day to measure off the picking garden to prepare for seed planting, stopping to look at the apple tree by the barn, covered with bright pink buds, each branch as rich and stiff as coral. The sun was deliciously warm on my back. I worked so hard that I did not realize what was happening. It was only when I went in that I discovered large, swollen red bites all over my neck, wrists, and ankles. Black flies. The truth is that every season in the country has its special ordeals, but what made the first year both exhilarating and difficult was that I came on them unprepared. I had heard of black flies, of course, and that a seasoned tourist keeps away from New Hampshire in May and June when they are at their worst. Now I understood why. Whenever I went out, at whatever time of day, a black cloud hovered over my head, a cloud of flies that settled one by one in every exposed place, crept under my glasses to bite my eyelids, crept into my ears, under the cuffs of my shirt, and up the legs of my jeans. Years later, I discovered a remedy only a little less disgusting than the bites. It is thick, brown, and smells of tar, and if I cover my face, neck, hands, and legs with this Woodsman's dope. I can work more or less in peace, but brief snatches of work out of doors, when the spirit moves, are out of the question, since I have to undress and have a bath after each expedition. The black flies could almost be endured. I had not reckoned with the woodchucks. Visually speaking, a woodchuck, especially a baby woodchuck, is an endearing animal. Round as a teddy bear, it sits up and hugs itself like a squirrel. My first emotions when I saw a mother with 2 babies playing in front of the barn was joyful surprise. The babies rolled over on their backs. The mother nibbled grass. It all seemed like a spring scherzo. But when I looked out the kitchen window the next morning and saw all the new flocks had been eaten back to the root, the dear little creatures became deadly enemies. Until then, I thought I had learned that if I didn't panic, I could handle any crisis that came up. This was different. I dashed out 100 times a day, waving my arms and shouting, knowing perfectly well that the marauders would return as soon as my back was turned. And of course the stone wall was a perfect apartment house, with many safe entrances and exits for them. I lay awake at night, wondering whether they were out or in. I was up at dawn. But the flocks grew back, and by then there was a lot of green stuff in the woods. Surely the animals would find something as good to eat elsewhere. I could not accept that my garden might be destroyed without ever having existed. That seemed preposterous to me, unfair, not to be born. Then the day came when I looked out and saw that the flocks had been eaten down a second time. I burst into tears of woe and frustration, and on an impulse called the Newt Tolmans. Janet recognized a note of desperation and assured me that Newt would be over with his gun within the hour. I don't suppose I have ever seen a more welcome arrival than Newt in his jeep. He came up the porch steps with a gun in his hand and a twinkle in his eye. "Here I am," he said. "What's up?" I explained my ridiculous plight of trying to make a garden against what appeared to be insuperable odds, and, God bless him, he didn't laugh. He said quite vehemently, "Why didn't you call for help, woman? That's what neighbors are for." We spent an hour drinking martinis and talking while we stood at the kitchen counter and watched and waited. Sure enough, a family of woodchucks appeared again, and Newt crept to the door like an Indian and got in a couple of shots, just too late to catch the wary and speedy creatures. How could I ever have dreamed that I would want an animal killed? But after all, the flocks too was a living thing, and had proved its resilience. The woodchuck had plenty to eat in the woods. Must they have caviar? Newt did kill one before he left, for Newt is a very good shot. The visit did not dispose of the problem, but it gave me new courage. In time of need, help would be forthcoming, and from more than one direction. A few mornings later, I heard secretive footsteps go by my bedroom window and looked out, startled, to see Ted Murdow out in the field with his gun. He came by every morning for a week on his way to work, and after that the woodchuck got the message, or perhaps they found something in the woods that they liked better than delicate perennials. The indomitable flocks came up a third time, and even flowered later on in the summer. So I have learned through the years to be more philosophical. I have also invested in a rifle. It has to be reloaded after every shot, so it is not a very effective weapon, but it makes a loud bang, and that is a comfort. It is more dignified to go out with a rifle than to rush out waving one's arms and screaming. I do not shoot to kill or wound, but to scare, and repeated scaring does have an effect, so that rifle has added a good deal to my composure and self-reliance. Self-reliance? Yes, but that first spring I had to learn dependency too. By crying for help and seeing help come from several directions, I began to learn what the village is all about. On the one hand, respect for privacy, and on the other, awareness of each other's needs. So however solitary some of us may look to an outsider, we are in truth part of an invisible web and supported by its presence. Help does materialize in a most astonishing way, as if some signal flashed off into space at a moment of need. Once, one of my cats had been chased to the very top of a tall, thin locust. I had called myself hoarse, had pleaded in vain, had gone in to let her think things over, had come back hopefully, only to be met by terrified mews, but not the slightest attempt to come down. Just then, a car stopped on the road. When a stranger got out and walked across the lawn toward me, I supposed that he wanted to ask directions, but he had seen what was happening and had taken the trouble to stop in order to offer his help. "The darn cat won't come down," I said crossly, for what could he do about it? "I used to be a fireman," he said, stripped off his coat, shinnied up 30 feet or more, caught the cat, and brought her down in a trice. I stammered my thanks, still too much of a city person not to be wholly amazed by such unexpected kindness. I can count on help in moments of real desperation, but for 3 years I had to rely on casual encounters or lucky chance to find a man to do this job or that which I could not manage alone. Most of the men around the village work on the roads, grading and cutting brush in summer, plowing in winter. They have their hands full just keeping us rolling. But I had not come to the country only to prove to myself that I could master various problems to do with cutting grass or pruning trees or making a garden where none had been before. I had come to write. There were times when I felt overwhelmed by these practical matters, but I always came back to the reality that the problems or ordeals connected with life in the country are enriching in some way, even when they seem like interruptions and bring frustration rather than fruition in their wake. Problems to do with climate, with snow or drought or high wind, problems to do with growing things, bring one right down to the marrow. They quickly become metaphor in the mind. They are the stuff of poetry. And there is never loss, the deadly, dull loss that life in the city almost always means. The loss of time spent battling one's way home in an airless subway cannot be compared, for example, with the loss of time spent in getting a cat down out of a tree, and chasing a woodchuck is, on the whole, more fun than chasing a taxi. But there were times that first spring, and have been since, when I asked myself whether I had undertaken more than I could manage. A place like this is finished. A place like this is more like a novel than a poem. Complex, never quite finished, operated on extended time, a balancing of many themes against each other. Work on it cannot be finished in one quick push. It must be resumed spring after spring, when black flies and woodchucks come back. It cannot be neglected for long, or you find yourself back where you started. A place like this must be fashioned and refashioned inch by inch. You wait and see. You wait and hope. You wait and work. What I needed, of course, was someone who would stay at my side, who would bring with him many kinds of lore that I do not possess, who would not panic as I sometimes do, a steady worker through all the seasons. That's the end of that chapter, and the next chapter is one I love, about her finding Pearly Cole, the man who would be her savior in many ways. It's funny reading Sarton's books, because in some ways they seem a little outdated. They never feel that way to me, but I mean, you can tell that these books were written decades ago, and yet they seem timely, and they feel pertinent for today as well. And there's much good meat to chew on, as May might say, much to think about. I hope if you are joining us, not as patrons, but just enjoying us and joining us on this Monday, that you enjoyed this bit of May Sarton. If you come to Patreon, you can go back to the beginning and listen to the whole book if you'd like. And we did a book before this, and we'll do a book after this. But I want to tell you all, because I won't be seeing you again until next Monday, if you're a visitor to our morning readings, that I wish you all a Merry Christmas, a happy, joyful Christmas week, even amidst COVID and everything that life brings. May there be light and love in your days, and all things merry and bright, even just in little moments here and there. Have a wonderful week. Patrons, I will see you in the room and tomorrow with another chapter. Much love.